Hello and welcome to episode. What episode number would this be?
8, buddy.
Jesus
Or
Christ.
9, depending on what stuff comes out.
22nd, not even.
Yeah, we have 7 up, but
Well, welcome to another episode of Well, There's Your Problem,
there you go. Episode question mark, question mark, question mark.
a podcast about engineering disasters, which is in and of itself a disaster as well.
Yeah, we're hitting some home runs.
On task as always.
I'm Justin Rosniak. I'm the person you're listening to. I have a YouTube channel called Do Not Eat where I talk about cities and socialism. But I also have this podcast, so this is shared equally between the three of us. My pronouns are he, him. And are we doing acknowledgments of land?
Yeah, I think so. Just to annoy people even more.
Exactly. I'm podcasting from Lenape territory, Lenni Lenape territory, which may or may not have been stolen. We don't know because all copies of the Treaty of Shakamaxon were destroyed by William Penn's descendants so they could justify stealing more land elsewhere.
Totally unsuspicious. I'm Alice Caldwell-Kelly. I am on a podcast called Trash Future as well as this. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm recording this from Glasgow, Scotland. So as far as this being stolen land, probably like in the process of enclosure or like clearances, it was stolen by somebody from somebody, but not a distinct indigenous group.
I guess I'll go next. Liam Anderson. Pronouns are he, him. Same on the Lenape. I'd actually like to point out that the Philly History Museum claims that a wampum belt in their possession serves as proof that such a meeting did take place for the treaty. However, they know nothing else beyond that. So it's just...
I think it'd be funny if the line of the treaty like went straight through the house, so that like your side of the house was stolen, but mine was bought fair and square.
This podcast is 1/4 recorded on stolen land.
That's actually not so bad. Well, you could have whatever the spilled beer on my floor back, I guess.
Taken all of this incredibly rich land and we've used it for such great purposes as spilling beer on it.
I'm sure somewhere in the deep recesses of my closet, there's still a tin of dip from like 2 years ago.
Gross.
So enjoy that.
And today we have a special guest, Sean. Tell the nice people about yourself.
Hi, I'm Sean Burton, pronouns he, him. I live in Corner Brook, Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm a substitute teacher up here right now. And I guess if we're doing the land acknowledgement, presumably this was Mi'kmaq land. There may have been Beothuk living here some time ago, but hard to tell because the colonialists killed them all. Yeah, not very nice. Twitter handle is Sean Red. I'm with the Communist Party of Canada, so I mostly retweet their stuff, do a bit of organizing up here.
Awesome.
Today we're gonna talk about a place not a lot of us have been, except for 3 of the 4 people on this podcast.
Appealing to a niche audience here.
I know, right? So not a lot of people know this, but if you get in your car and you drive north on I-95, you can go past Boston and you wind up in this place called Maine, right?
This is a speedrunning trick, right? You clip through the level and you arrive in the main stage.
Yes, exactly. If you keep going up 95, you get to this place called Bangor. I hardly knew her.
God damn it.
Oh,
Do we not have a photo of the Paul Bunyan statue?
Then you take this road called the Maine Airline. This is where you clip through the level to a place called Calais, and then you cross the border into this place called New Brunswick.
oh, why would you though?
Because we had to.
They pronounce it Calais, not Calais. That's annoying. Like that's stealing valor from the French port. Just this is the rule with Canada that I'm discovering as we do more of this CanCon, is that everything in Canada that's French is pronounced wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you should hear the place names in Newfoundland. They'll drive you bonkers.
Awesome.
And if you keep going, you go to Nova Scotia, you get to Cape Breton Island in a place called North Sydney. And if you get on a boat up there, you'll cross the Cabot Strait and wind up on an island called Newfoundland. Whoa. And if you keep going, you wind up in a place called St. John's. Now, once you didn't have to drive this whole way, you could take a train. And that's the subject to today's episode, the Newfoundland Railway and its closure. And this was, I guess, more relevant a couple weeks ago. But the Tories in the UK made news recently with their promise to undo the Beeching Axe, right?
Yes. Dr. Beeching destroyed most of the, like, unprofitable or not profitable enough local railway services that people actually, kind of needed. So, like, villages that had, like, one railway train go through, like, a day, all of those lines were just destroyed entirely in the 60s. Wasn't ideal, no.
But, and of course, the Tories aren't very serious about this because they're only budgeting £500 million. Vote Labour.
I mean, like, some fucking electrification would be nice, maybe, and some, like, in the north or in Wales.
Is there any electrification now in the UK?
Yes, but, like, as with all good things about this country, if there is something good, it exists in southeast England. So, like, we have high-speed rail that's going to, like, intended to go up to the so-called Northern Powerhouse, and that's going to be electrified. And, yeah, that's going to take forever, and it's going to be shit, and you have this wild thing where you end up with just awful trains going out of London, and then the very nice, shiny, expensive ones that go towards London. I don't know, maybe more efficient to run them both ways, but what do I know?
You have a high-speed rail that only gets you out of Britain entirely.
Yes, literally yes.
But there have been many beaching axes in many countries and places around the world, and I'm sure through the course of this podcast we'll talk about many of them, but today we're going to talk about roads for rails and the closure of the Newfoundland Railroad.
Beaching Canada edition.
Oh yeah, I mean, they're constantly closing via rail lines, but...
Thanks for nothing, Justin Trudeau.
I'm surprised that they reopened the line to Churchill. Are you aware of that one, Justin?
I am aware of the Churchill line. That one's cool as hell.
Yeah, we can go see some polar bears.
Yeah, you probably heard that line washed out a year or two ago. I don't know. It was horribly maintained anyway by the company that bought it out, and it was a hell of an ordeal to convince the federal government to come in and do the necessary repairs. I'm just shocked they actually did. It's only because there's no other road up there.
Well, also, if they keep extracting oil out of Alberta, Churchill will be a nice free port.
Yeah, they haven't
That's
really.
true.
Again, that port's just kind of been
all the way around the top.
Go ahead.
All right, so
That's okay.
Every piece of evidence that suggests that we're going to get better at this with practice, we just overwhelm with the force of our incompetence.
yes,
I find it endearing.
So
tell me about the trains.
I'm going to tell you about the trains.
Hurry up.
All right. So, okay, so the Newfoundland Railway was a 3-foot, 6-inch narrow gauge railway. It had a 549-mile main line from Port aux Basques to St. John, or rather, St. John was mile 0, so it went to Port aux Basques.
549 miles across an island in this tiny, like, incredibly narrow railroad. Awesome.
I promise you, driving
yes.
across it is worse.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm certain. Because as we've established, train good and car bad. Just that this seems like a very small train. I don't want to, like, stick my arms out the side and lose a forearm to a telegraph pole.
Well, I mean, it was proportional. I mean, I don't know how deeply we're going to get into the history here, but when it was originally conceived, the survey in 1875, they did recommend a nice standard gauge line that was only going to be something like 300 miles, and it was going to terminate not too far from where Corner Brook is, actually, which might have been a bit more doable. But anyway, they ended up building it not just the narrow gauge, but with this really convoluted, twisty, steep curve construction that some people compared to a roller coaster.
Which we see here.
Yes.
Fair enough.
I mean, obviously, the thing that we want is the Elon Musk approach, where we just, like, drive an entirely straight tunnel all the way across Newfoundland.
Good luck, you fuckers.
They couldn't even build a damn highway right.
Oh, I enjoyed your curvy, twisty highway in the middle of fucking nowhere.
Oh, Jesus. We'll get to that, though.
Now that we're not in the country anymore, can confirm that my GTI hit VMAX on your beautiful island. Please don't prosecute me, Canada.
That was the one nice thing about the island, though, is that there were no cops.
The one
anywhere.
nice thing? You loved it.
Well, no, there are many,
You
many nice
piece
things.
of
Yes.
shit.
Horrible guest.
I do want to say, though, that week you were here, I know the weather was shit, but
Oh, it sure was.
usually summers are pretty good. I don't know. For some reason, that first week of July was just a shit show.
It was great to be 49 degrees in July.
I just love the idea that there's no cops on Newfoundland, not because like they're underfunded or something, but because there was a land bridge that they could have crossed, but Newfoundland separated and became an island too soon. And just the cops became stranded on mainland Canada.
Cops never evolved here.
Yeah.
Have fun in Blanc Sablon, you fuck.
Oh, they did. They just used a different name.
Now there was one passenger train that went all the way across the island that was called the Caribou.
Yeah.
It ran on a 23-hour schedule, and it was pretty heavily used in World War II when they were building a couple of air bases on the island. And the soldiers using it called it the Newfie Bullet because it was very slow. It's a very slow train. It's a joke. You can see down here. I put a stamp here. Showing the train going very fast.
Oh, look how cute it is.
That's not actually what it looked like.
There was actually one section of track that was actually straight and level enough where they could get up to 90 kilometers an hour.
Wow.
Wow, 50
It was,
That's incredible.
Yeah, shocking.
So and there were unique features on this line. Like it was when it was completed in 1898, as Sean said, it did this kind of convoluted route. So I went through a place called what's it?
Gaff Topsails.
Topsail. Yeah, so that's right here, right? And you can see this is what the snow was like
Jesus.
up here.
Yeah, so the original planned surveyed route went considerably to the south of this location, but for some reason, when the line got to Central, the colonial government was like, no, let's just build it straight across this exposed high terrain. What could possibly go wrong? Yeah, in the days of steam, it was not unusual for trains to get stuck there for days.
Awesome.
Fun stuff.
Wow. We have this other part of the island where the train went down here, and this is called Wreck House. Now, why is it called Wreck House?
It's a mispronunciation of the ancient French town of Raqui.
That's a good guess, but
Yeah, thank you. I just fucked it.
It's
and,
quite literal
yeah.
here, actually.
Yeah, it's actually because the wind would just wreck your house if you built one there. As we can see by this steam locomotive on its side.
That's not a
It
house.
was just standing there, and the wind blew it over. Well, it weighs the same as a house.
That's true.
The sort of spiritual antecedents of our podcast are the guys in that photo just being like, well, there's your problem.
Just flip it over and get it back on the rails and everything will be fine. Yeah, it was super tight to look for gas in Wreck House in driving rain.
Just that guy with his hands in his pockets being like, yeah, I see what's gone wrong here.
Yeah, just off the ferry at Port aux Basques, and it's like, oh, what have we gotten ourselves into?
Yeah, I was pretty fucking certain we were gonna die.
It's usually pretty down there.
It was very pretty, even in the fog, but it was pretty in like a deadly way.
In the way Silent Hill can be pretty, yeah.
And I put a picture of the rail yard in Port aux Basques up here during like the heyday.
Look at all the CN friends.
Are we saying here that that Newfoundland is a survival horror island?
Maybe that's more true in more ways than one.
They're just situating it in that genre.
So anyway, there's a couple interesting things about how this railroad was structured. The railroad's mentioned in the terms of union, which is like Newfoundland's sort of constitution.
Well, because it was a separate country from Canada, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it was a different colony, and it had to unite with Canada in the same way Scotland did England.
Y'all didn't have a referendum, did you, Alice? Someone just decided.
Yeah, it was how to put this, a crown colony, I guess, until 1907, 1905. Then it was a dominion until 1949. But really, from 1933 to 1949, the island was governed directly from London by a commission of government.
Awesome. How do we do it that? Aside from like building a railroad across a giant exposed fucking glacier.
Well, a legacy of underdevelopment.
Yeah, we get that a lot. Our bad?
Yeah, I don't blame you personally.
You should. Alice was there.
You should.
Tearing
yes.
up the rails.
Damn you!
I saw her.
Yeah, it's like those pictures of like old people in the Civil War who look like Keanu Reeves or whatever. You look up the like Crown Commissioner and it's just looks like me, but with like a bicorn hat.
Alice actually invented Sherman's neckties. So, some of the things which are mentioned in the terms of union is like how freight rates are to be set and how the province expects the federal government to maintain the railroad. This is when they joined with Canada in 49. And then in 65, the Trans-Canada Highway opened, which actually has in some ways a more convoluted route.
Yeah, for sure.
Trans-Canada rights, I suppose. No, nothing for that?
I think actually the highway is like 30 or 40 kilometers longer than the railway was.
That sounds about right.
Does it regularly get covered in like 20-foot high snow?
Oh God, yes.
Awesome. That's what we want to see from any mode of transit.
Yeah, especially like a road though, where you can slip off of it real easy, as
Yeah.
opposed to like a railroad where you have like flanges, you know. So that opened in 1965, and they killed the Caribou train as a result. The train that went across the island.
God
And
damn
they
it.
replaced it with buses running a 16-hour schedule.
There's just not as much romance if you can't get stuck in a glacier for fucking 3 days.
Yeah, what am I supposed to do with all these fanfic tropes?
Yeah, the buses, they actually started those in 1967. They ran them concurrently with the train. It was a weird situation where you had CN basically competing with itself to just say, see, buses are so much better and more modern. So they kind of undermined their own operation there.
Typical Canadian socialism, duplicating the work.
So they kept some limited passenger service on branch lines, and then once a year they ran a passenger train across the island called the Trouter Special. And this was the first nail in the coffin, right? Because not a lot of people were using the railroad itself for, personal travel, right?
Morons.
Are you still shipping freight across this, though?
Oh,
yes.
They're shipping a crap load of freight, yeah. But improvements to the main line no longer directly served the traveling public, so there was less, political support for the railroad. So, we got to talk about who was operating the railroad at this point, which is Canadian National, right?
Dun 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 dun. Demonetized instantly for that.
They're not competent enough to get the Imperial March treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. We're gonna get a copyright strike, and I'm gonna say, look, I don't care.
I just want to know what your railroad is doing in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania. This is not a question that has been answered for me. In Newtown Square, there is a weird little branch of CN, and all I can find on it on the internet is that it has something to do with their chemical division, and I want to know what fucking happened there.
Chemical division? Jesus.
It's neocolonialism. It's like planting the flag. You annex that part of Pennsylvania for Canada.
You could have it.
It's going to be the next province, yeah.
We have terms of union with Canada for Pennsylvania.
Just burn all the copies of that treaty, too.
So, Canadian National was sort of a nationalized system that was pieced together out of several railroads that were sort of failing in Canada, right? And they competed directly with the Canadian Pacific Railroad, which was about as big and entirely privatized.
Right, but Justin, we love nationalized railroads. Like, it's two things we love, railroads and nationalization. So why was I singing off-key the Empire theme from Star Wars?
It's called the Imperial March.
Because, as a matter of fact, this meant that Canadian National immediately took over the Newfoundland Railway under the terms of union, right? So they were running the railroad, they were running the ferries to Nova Scotia starting in 1949, and both of these things lost money at a pretty hefty rate, right? This was not a money-making operation at the time, especially after the Trans-Canada Highway was completed. They start saying, all right, we're going to do some capital improvements here. So one of the first things they did was they built a system where your standard gauge railroad car could have its bogies swapped with narrow gauge bogies at Port aux Basques in about 1968. You can sort of see this on this mixed train here. You can see the tiny narrow gauge passenger cars and then this big ass standard gauge box car here.
Yeah, it looks so unwieldy.
I love to be like just rattling along on the top of this with like 3 feet of carriage out to each side with nothing underneath it. Awesome.
It feels so safe.
When they got good at this, they could swap out the bogies on a freight car in 15 minutes. But that still meant if you brought 60 cars over on the ferry, it took 15 hours to swap over a 60-car train, right?
Yeah, it's a hefty delay. I think, well, this comes up in the report, which I guess is soon. But yeah, that was under strictly ideal conditions. And when you're dealing with an average ferry load of 40 to 60 cars, that 10 or 15 hour delay is going to hold you back a lot.
Just a bunch of extremely grumpy Newfoundlanders.
Newfoundlanders.
Newfoundlanders. Yeah, and fuck.
Newfoundlanders.
Change name of group chat to Newfoundlanders. Yeah, just a bunch of extremely pissed off Newfies having to change all of this shit in like driving rain and snow under immense time pressure. I'm sure that went perfectly.
Well, they actually had a really nice facility there in the yard. It was quite large. And in fact, it was probably the main employer in the town, which, it's something.
I am told you're not supposed to say Newfie.
Oh, is it a slur?
Yeah.
Have I committed slurs?
I personally don't care. It's one of those weird things. Some people get their pennies in a bunch over it, I guess. Depends on how you say it, I suppose.
I mean, in my defense, I only said it because I was physically unable to pronounce Newfoundlander.
No, I don't mind. In this context, it was
the other N word.
Yeah. Also, just something as an aside with regards to the CN operations here. So, in addition to the railway and the ferries to Nova Scotia, they also operated all of the coastal boats. And back in the day, that was a huge operation. Really, there weren't any roads in Newfoundland worthy of the name. So getting around, you had to take this packet or that packet just to get to anywhere. And there's still a handful of these routes in existence because, shockingly, the provincial government hasn't gotten around to finishing all the roads.
Well, I mean, that is praxis, just for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, it was pretty confusing to me that we had to drive into the interior of Newfoundland as opposed to, say, on the southern coast or something.
Well, actually, there was some talk about the south coast as a route when the railway was conceived as well. It's just that, so you remember what Port aux Basques looks like?
Yep.
Most of the south coast of Newfoundland is worse than that. Very rocky, very high cliffs, and deep fjords. So you have to pretty much go into the interior just to avoid all that crap.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
That'll do it. So anyway, I put in the notes here. Note the size of the standard gauge boxcar here. This is a regular mainline 40-foot boxcar. Now, one of the advantages here is that any sort of like mainline railroad car that could, fit within the 40-foot envelope could, make it onto Newfoundland now. But in practice, only Canadian National and Canadian Pacific boxcars ever made it. And then CN operated the whole railroad out of this wonderful place called Moncton, New Brunswick.
That's not what the notes say. What do the notes say about Moncton?
Moncton is one of the worst places I've been in my life.
Fucking miserable.
It's all the most miserable parts of North Jersey, but somehow it's hotter. It was 90 degrees when we were there, which was just appalling.
Compared to the fact that we had spent the last week 40-degree weather.
I've never spent any significant time in New Brunswick. I always just drove through it.
probably the worst city on earth, is what your notes say.
Yeah, that is what I said. It was not good. St. John is beautiful. Moncton, bleh.
And that's where the Via Rail station is.
So, now there was the Federal Commission of Inquiry into Newfoundland Transportation, right? Also known as the Sullivan Commission. They started looking into like how much this railroad was costing to run. This is in 1979, right? As you can see from the picture, it says 1979 because I had to reference that because I didn't put it in the notes.
Yeah, it's just that the notes are just a bunch of things about how bad Moncton is, repeated over and over for like 15 lines.
Yeah, it's a little weird, man. Do you need to talk? I remember we got out of the car and just like in disbelief felt like I was standing on the surface of the sun. It was fucking horrible. And your beer was good, my beer was bad. Man was born to suffer.
Actually, the brewery was pretty good from my perspective because I had a good beer. Liam had a bad beer, so it was not so good. But we had driven from North Sydney to Moncton in like one shot, so it was just astonishing that the change in temperature.
Fucking miserable.
I assure you, the summers here are usually much warmer.
Great. This is just a thermocline.
It was an anomalous week.
I have no reason to believe you.
I liked the cold.
So did I.
That's why you keep going to Canada.
Oh,
That's
okay.
why we
Well,
went.
you're entitled to that, I suppose.
So, anyway, according to NewfoundlandHeritage.ca, the commission pulled no punches about the railway. All of the available evidence indicates that ... the railway cannot continue as a viable service, the reports read. Therefore, it should now be planned to have a transportation network which does not include a railway in approximately 10 years' time. Now, recommendation 29 stated that plans should be commenced now to phase out the railway, but recommendation 30 provided for 5 years of renewed marketing and reorganization, after which the decision to abandon the line would be reevaluated. But it was clear the Sullivan Commission didn't have, high hopes for the railroad.
What a fucking, like, Disney teen movie-ass clause to include. Like, well, if somebody can just pay the exact amount to buy out the youth center, then we won't have to shut it down.
And then there was a competing report which was commissioned by the province as opposed to the federal government, called the Cabot-Martin Report, and that was published in 1980. And they said, look, all we need to do, we just need to keep the railroad, we need to convert it to standard gauge, right? Which may or may not have been feasible.
It's easy, you just pull the rails apart.
I have to look this up. I didn't know this report.
You just get a stick or whatever and you just push the rails apart. Easy.
Yeah.
Well,
Two guys with sticks.
I will say this, the Erie Railroad in the United States converted its entire main line from Chicago to New York City from its own special gauge to standard gauge in 2 days.
Wow.
That's a lot of guys with sticks.
By using
So,
the
but
stick
they literally
thing to
spread it
push the
apart.
rails apart. Yeah.
They had this nice advantage that the Erie gauge was 6 feet, as opposed to being narrower than 4 foot 8.5 inches.
Oh, so they push them together.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't work as easily the other way around. Not sure why.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, there's probably like stuff in the way. There might be like trees or like bridges and stuff.
Or like a 500-foot gorge on one side, a 500-foot cliff on the other.
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll make it a bit tricky.
Actually, when going back to just briefly the improvements that CN did when they took over, they did embark on replacing the steel in the main line to make it heavier. Although I don't think that was ever completed across the entire main line, and they never did that on the branch lines. The branch lines, they were very sketchy up to the very end. But yeah, the Sullivan Commission did go into quite a lot of detail on the fate of the railway, which the heritage site doesn't really do it any justice by simply summarizing it like that. They talked about the possibility of converting it to standard gauge, which obviously would mean a brand new line being constructed. They had a price estimation there, and they talked about how it would improve travel times by, I think they said 12 hours. even the possibility of keeping it narrow gauge, but actually building it to a decent standard, i.e. more straight and level, and that would have put it on par with places like, I guess, New Zealand or Queensland, Australia. Then it still would have reduced travel times, but they just kind of waved it off as saying, well, the reduced travel times still don't do away with the fact we got to ship things over by the ferry and deal with assembling trains in Port aux Basques, and I don't think it was a strong argument on their part, but they did say, well,
Yeah, not like anybody was like aware of the potential risks of shipping a bunch of stuff by road and becoming dependent on that in 1979.
Worry about it later. Worry about it later.
Like, literally every single thing has to go on this one road now. But
It's fine. It's fine.
Yes, and as established, that road, I mean, some parts of it are okay, but that's okay. We'll get to the
Just
highway a
put
bit
that
later,
on-
I guess.
Just put that on
Yeah,
the
okay.
sign, a big reflective sign saying, some parts of it are okay.
Well,
Not many.
you've seen those potholes ahead signs. They should just put one in Port aux Basques, and that's the only one they need, because
Yeah.
As it turns out, there are many of them.
Yes.
My favorite part of driving on the Trans-Canada was that part outside of Gander where we almost ran into a cliff face twice. And I had 2 panic attacks, and Roz managed to limped into Gander and went to Jungle Gym
Was it on the way from St. John's or towards St. John's?
towards St. John's.
it's towards St. John's.
Oh my goodness! I'm trying to remember which section that is now.
We were smart on the way back. Took the ferry from Argentia.
Oh.
You just drive the road once and you're like, never again.
Oh, I will post on the official our Twitter the picture I took of Roz and I in the cabin on the longboat, where both of us just look abjectly miserable, and there are no windows, and we had just been shit faced on Rickard's Red because we had nothing else to do.
Yeah.
You know it's
Yeah.
good when it's a brand of alcohol I've never heard of.
It was good. It was good.
My wife drinks it.
I like it. I thought it was a good beer.
Also,
Good mass market beer.
had that good old Molson Triple X. Had the good stuff.
I mean, I'm just drinking Corona with this, so whatever.
What's the IPA that's doesn't taste like an IPA at all?
Any goddamn Canadian
From
IPA.
Nova Scotia. No. This is like the mass market.
Oh,
one.
Alexander
Pride of Nova
Keith's?
Scotia.
Alexander Keith's.
Alexander Keith.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just tastes like a lager. There goes a
Yeah,
fire
enjoy
truck.
hearing that in
Wow.
2 audio feeds.
I know, right?
You get like a Doppler effect between the two of you.
Probably. We're cursed by God, unfortunately, so.
Yes.
Just one of these days we'll be recording this and the refinery is going to explode.
Frantically trying to
Again.
record before the tsunami fire kills us both.
Yeah. Just like, what does hydrogen fluoride leak sound like?
Bad.
Bad.
Yeah.
So in 1978, right, Canadian National begins a process of denationalization.
Fuckers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So see, they become a crown corporation, which is sort of a state-owned
It's
corporation.
a synonym for useless.
It's sort of like Amtrak, right? It's owned by the government. It's supposed to be profitable, but like RA will slide you the money at the end of the year if you don't make a profit.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Fantastic. Love to
Yeah.
have a public good that has to make a profit every year.
Yeah.
On an island with not a lot of people and a lot of stuff that needs shipping.
Yeah, imagine that.
And we have balkanization of the service, right? So before it was the train in Nova Scotia, the train at the ferry, and then the train on Newfoundland were all owned by the same company, right? It was all Canadian National. They all sort of worked together. Now we're starting to spin off companies into different crown corporations. So the ferries go to CN Marine, which later became Marine Atlantic.
You say balkanization, I'm taking that entirely literally and being like Marine Atlantic is core Serbian territory.
Get ready for some cursed Balkan YouTube comments.
Ooh.
Can't wait.
Look, Newfoundland has always been part of Croatia, and that's all there is to
Ooh, all right.
it.
And then the Newfoundland Railway itself was spun off as Terra Transport, right?
Terror with an OR? Like,
Terra, Terra.
Terra.
Yeah, as in yeah,
Like land in French, because Newfoundland is Terra Nova.
yeah.
Fucking creative.
It's a cool logo.
I was going to ask about the logo situation.
Good logo.
Because, like, we had the MMA railroad logo, and that was a good logo for a shitty railroad, so I'm hoping we're in a similar
Yes.
situation here.
This was also at the same time, in addition to this split up with CM Marine and Terra Transport, that's when the passenger service was reestablished as Via Rail in the rest of the country.
Yes.
To go via rail. That's a very clever name.
And it works in both languages, so they were excited about that.
The new, it's just like the LRCs were light, rapid, comfortable in English, and then in French it was the acronym still worked.
Yeah, léger, rapide, don't know what comfortable is.
Comfortable.
I'm gonna fail my citizenship test. Not gonna be a landed immigrant. Wonderful.
So yeah, in other words, there were three companies that it was a deliberate move, right, on the part of Canadian National to make the Newfoundland Railroad seem like it was losing more money than it was, so they could get more dollars from the government at the end.
Oh,
of the
that's
year.
clever. I'm sure that worked flawlessly.
So, sort of a Brewster's Millions railroad type situation.
Yeah, and it started handling freight through three separate companies instead of one through the Cabot Strait crossing, which of course almost all freight had to do. Chaos and pandemonium at the ports. No, for initially, like no one even could figure out which company they were supposed to be working for.
Incredible.
Just a railroad operating license given to one Franz Kafka.
Yeah, that's me. I'll be there on Tuesday. Have to go to work at the railroad. You're half bug. Just like lump it in with your thermos. Just like, Franz, you look so good. Yeah, no, man, it was a rough weekend. Let's just fucking unload this shit.
They expect you to double your productivity because you have two more legs.
You got two more legs, Kafka. Let's see you lift some shit.
I do want to say, from this picture, I guess, well, these containers, they actually still see a lot of these around, not just on the island, they're floating around the mainland here and there. I saw a couple up in somewhere near Hamilton, Ontario last year, just sitting in a field.
That's not where you want to see those.
Well, no, but it was still neat to see, hey, it's a Terra Transport container.
It's interesting how like containerization started, because this was something that was pioneered in Alaska on the White Pass and Yukon Railroad, which was another narrow gauge railroad which was facing financial difficulties, and they sort of came up with this idea, well, why don't we have standardized containers that we can just offload from a ship and unload onto the train like immediately, rather than doing all this crap with getting people with push carts to unload and reload boxcars.
Yeah, big hooks for like handling sacks of stuff.
Yes. So the Newfoundland Railroad, or Terra Transport now, is one of the first like mass adopters of containerization, and this was a very successful business endeavor. And it was provided at very low freight rates because of the conditions in the Constitution or in the terms of union. And because it was very successful, the competition starts getting organized. And I'm going to do the same thing I did last podcast. I got to use the restroom,
dude.
Right,
let me get a beer in this case then.
Yeah, and I guess on the topic of the containers, yeah, so they were hugely successful because the Sullivan Commission report it assumed that the freight rates, that the volumes were going to go down year after year after year, and they were projecting by the late 80s you'd only have one train a week sort of thing. But I mean, well into the mid 80s you had lengthy freight trains running every day. Again, mostly with these containers. It was only one train per day in each direction. You have two main freights, one eastbound, one westbound, and there was a like an extra that would run across the middle of the island from Bishop's Falls out here to the west coast in Corner Brook. And that actually still ran a couple coaches on it because there were a bunch of people who had cabins up in the middle of nowhere. So they accommodated that. I don't know if that train ran daily. It might have been a couple times a week or once a week or something like that.
Love to be getting the train at the end of like 60 freight cars full of just absolute bullshit freight. It's just like, I don't know, 12 other people.
That doesn't sound like it would be bad, though. I mean, because you could just, like...
That's such a fucking murder mystery setup. Like, no, but it sounds like the lights go out and then the least popular one of us is found
Alright, well,
dead.
I have the fewest $20, so that fucking sucks for me. Please do not murder me in Newfoundland. Thanks in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, apparently, not speaking of murder,
Go on.
back before when the regular passenger service was still on the go in the 60s and the 50s, there was also an option to ride a mixed train from Port aux Basques to St. John's, and that I think took 35 hours.
Fuck.
Wow.
So that's what you take when you're absolutely desperate. Yeah, every now and then you get little extra trains running like that. I just living here under the current circumstances, I find it hard to fathom even a bus that runs multiple times a day. We'll probably get into that when we talk about the highway, but there is actually a coach system here, and system is in very heavy quotation marks.
I have returned.
I
need to work on my beer schedule to make sure I don't need to take bathroom breaks in the middle of the pod.
We did not discuss the fanfics.
No, it's fine. We got a nice sound effect of me opening the second Corona in here, so it was worth
Very
it.
good.
Very nice.
Also a digression about murder.
Now I really want a beer, though, and I can't get up, so thanks for nothing.
I was also I was big on drinking Coronas on Marine Atlantic because I was
Yeah.
on a boat.
Yeah, he was.
I'm
just out here like pounding Caesars at 12:30 a.m. Just like, I'm gonna go to bed one way or another.
I'm on a boat in a tropical location. I'm drinking a Corona.
Yeah, that's it. That's where we were.
Yeah.
So we start seeing some competition for container traffic, right? And they're getting organized because the CN's undercutting them through Terra Transport, right? So you had Atlantic Freight Lines Limited and Newfoundland Steamship Lines, who were two private marine shipping companies. They're like, the railroad's undercutting our rates. We can't compete with each other anymore. We need to compete with the railroad. So they merge into Atlantic Container Express, which is now called Ocean X.
Oh yeah,
The
Ocean
names
X.
get worse every time.
I gotta say a few words about Ocean X because they are still saying the same shit, only now it's directed at Marine Atlantic. Yeah. No, I mean, so they had an operation here in Corner Brook. Corner Brook has a port. It's not really being used anymore. But they used to bring their container ships in here, and they gave up. But then they keep complaining. Oh, Marine Atlantic, they keep stealing all our freight because they're so cheap. And I proposed to their CEO on Twitter, well, maybe the solution is to merge Marine Atlantic and Ocean X to form a single entity called Marine Atlantic. He did not respond to that.
Dickhead CEO, go on the podcast.
We'll just berate him constantly.
Yeah, for an hour.
Sid Hines, Captain Sid Hines. He
Of
likes
course
to
he
emphasize
does.
the captain.
Jesus. Captain fucking Birdseye.
So, Atlantic Container Express, later to be Ocean X, complains to the Canadian Transportation Commission that they can't compete with the low-rate Terra Transport Container Service, and they try to use the government to force them to raise their rates. And, because they're like, this is anti-competitive, this is federally subsidized, blah, 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 blah. I can't compete. It's poor private industry, me.
Yeah, like, even a fucking, like, denationalized enterprise is still more efficient than you because it gets subsidies. Like, is that not the best argument for nationalization? It is. It is the best argument for nationalization, in case there was any room for doubt there.
Oh, I wasn't sure for a second there.
the thing is, they're now trying, they're arguing the case before the CTC, and the threat of rates going up starts to drive shippers away from using the railroad to using trucks, right? Yeah.
I really do appreciate this sort of that, like, that's a cultural difference. Instead of booing, you just have the
boo. There you go. I got it.
Boo.
Got you, Alex.
Terra Transport starts trying to find efficiencies. They start eliminating branch lines. They start to they really focus on their traffic originating from or destined for points off the island. Particularly concentrating on traffic that goes from St. John's to Port aux Basques. And the CTC eventually rules that the railroad has to raise its rates.
Oh, bullshit. So even if they didn't have to do that, right, because they're cutting costs by cutting all these outlying things, if you're some, like, I don't know, some business, some muffler shop in, like, fucking arse end of nowhere, Newfoundland.
Great tab.
Dildo.
Great tab.
Yeah, if you run a muffler shop on Dildo and you rely on the railroad to get your shipment of mufflers or whatever, you can just either get it by truck or get fucked, whether they put the rates up or not. Awesome.
Although I don't know if did the railroad ever make it to Dildo?
Beautiful.
Dildo's a real town in Newfoundland.
Yeah. So that section of the Avalon, there actually used to be a branch line on each side of that. I don't know if it went into Dildo proper,
But a double-sided dildo sort of thing.
but it went fairly close by. But the main branch line ran up through Bay Roberts and Carbonear and Harbor Grace, all that. The branch lines were they were a huge waste of money. A lot of those were built in the early 20th century, and I guess if they had been built to a decent standard, I suppose, yes, they would have been fine. But the only one that really mattered as far as traffic was concerned was the line around between St. John's and Harbor Grace. It's about 80 miles, something like that. The other ones were, they were really long, and they serviced very tiny populations. They were still useful to have, and there were no other roads, so they did get used. But by the mid 80s, they were only getting 1 or 2 trains per week, because they were, most of these places had secondary highways built by then, and they were close enough to connect with the main line or with the new Trans-Island Highway, so it made, in some sense, less sense to run trains on a regular basis. The most interesting branch line element, I guess, was in the Bonavista Peninsula. This is another kind of like northeast coast of the island, and they had to build a loop there, and for some reason that was a big deal because most train loops, I guess, are under mountains in the Rockies, that sort of thing. But yeah, this is an open air loop, so if that was preserved actually after the branch line was shut down in '84.
I'm glad they kept the important thing.
Oh yeah.
Well, because the Sullivan Commission report actually went into detail and said, hey, this section, not just the loop, but that whole branch line should probably be preserved as a heritage railway. But all we got was the loop left, and actually the provincial government, shockingly, hasn't done anything with it and let it rot. There was a businessman leased it and had a theme park there for the 90s. It was a fun little place. He had a little shunter locomotive running around with a couple carriages all done up in this faux circus train livery. And there was a Ferris wheel and all this restaurant. It was a cute spot, but
first is tragedy, then as
Yeah.
indeed. And then the guy fucking walked away from it, and the place was vandalized, and then in 2010, 2011, Hurricane Igor just flooded the place out, and so now it looks like a post-apocalyptic nightmare.
A shocking glimpse of things to come.
I have an idea for a Patreon stretch goal now, though.
Yeah.
Build
let's
Trinity
go.
Loop.
Are we just urbexing it, or are we rescuing it? Because I think those Two different goals, I think.
Oh, we're rescuing it. Oh no, we're building it back, motherfucker.
Yep.
We're coming back.
I want to run. I want to run a tiny train on a loop.
Yeah, he does. This is his whole life.
Just the most podcast thing we could do would be to run a tiny loop that somehow also connects Dildo to Intercourse, Pennsylvania.
I got this. I will, being a Pennsylvania boy, I will reach out to the Amish.
Well, it is closer to Come by Chance.
Oh, yep.
Just fuck it. Go transatlantic. Bring it to Twat in Orkney.
Do the live show on our transatlantic railroad. Meet in the middle.
Yes. Just one extremely long bridge. Should be fine.
Trans in more ways than one.
Oh.
All right. So the CTC ruled the railroad has to raise rates. Canadian National appeals the CTC ruling because it's in clear violation of the terms of union, but the damage is done at this point, right? The threat is enough to move shippers away. So, Canadian National prevails. The CTC order is revoked. I think it takes 2 years, but at this point, politicians were talking about roads for rails, right? Which is agreeing to close the railway in return for highway improvements.
Is this a highway that we're seeing before or after the improvements? Because looking at it as
Hell yeah, the red.
I assure you it is after.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is that trailer guy ahead of us? Yeah, my boy.
That is Trailer Guy, yes. We'll talk about Trailer Guy in a second.
And this I know where this is too. This section where the pavement is slightly redder.
It sure was. It was disorienting.
Near Grand Falls or Springdale, like between that section. Yeah.
So since there was no passenger service on the railroad, there's no political support for railroad improvements other than from shippers. So, in 1988, the deed is done. Newfoundland receives $800 million for road improvements, $800 million Canadian dollars.
Yeah.
So that's like 36, $6 US, yeah. For road improvements in exchange for allowing Canadian National to abandon the 549 remaining miles of the Newfoundland Railroad.
Why do I have to sign this contract in blood?
That's why the asphalt is red here.
Yes, of course.
So what do they do with the $800 million? Short stretches of the Trans-Canada are turned into 4-lane divided highways, and they build a few new highways in St. John's and Corner Brook. But, most of the road is this treacherous, unforgiving, crowded, high-speed, undivided 3-lane road.
Fuck
and
yeah.
You'll notice this section. This section here has an actual suicide lane in the middle. We've abolished those in the United States, but the markings here.
Wow, are you serious? I thought that was a normal thing.
No, the one way in which the US is more progressive than Canada. Maybe you should explain what a suicide lane is for the people who don't know.
So a suicide lane is you have one lane for travel in one direction, another lane for travel in the other direction, and there's a shared passing lane in the center.
Yes, where you would have a median, right?
Yeah, what's the markings on the highway across Newfoundland, do indicate preference for passing in one direction as opposed to passing in the other direction. But ultimately that doesn't, mean anything. You can pass if you want to.
Yeah, buddy.
And then hit a truck that's passing in the opposite direction at 60 miles an hour.
We hit no trucks.
Awesome.
We hit no trucks.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, I actually would like to take a minute to talk about our hero.
I think there's 3 or 4 deaths on the highway in this last 2 weeks alone.
Sounds
about right. So, Trailer Guy, we followed from, I think, about Corner Brook to damn near St. John's.
No, it was past Corner. It was after Gander.
Oh, was it?
We picked.
Okay. Well, that's a hell of a distance. He drove ahead of us well into triple digits, and this is miles per hour, not kilometers per hour. And managed to block for us every single time.
You had an advance car.
Yeah,
that's
we
awesome.
essentially had a blocker car because, again, I am now not in Canada, so I could talk about how fast I was driving. We were regularly also in triple digits for that spot where it wasn't super foggy and terrifying. And this guy managed to save our ass at least a dozen times by blocking
I
for
love
us.
this fucking social Darwinist highway. This is what the Autobahns would have been like if the wrong side had won the war. Just a bunch of people driving at 200 miles an hour. It's just, you need a fucking Secret Service motorcade by accident to fucking, like, survive. Incredible.
That guy was mutual aid in truck form, and
Yes.
it was incredible.
Yeah, we should get some like stickers or some shirts or something about Trailer Guy to introduce him into the podcast extended universe.
I would love that. I would buy a shirt that I would make money from that just says "I heart Trailer Guy."
Mm-hmm. just that little silhouette of the truck with the trailer on it. Awesome.
There were in Canada at this point, after they abandoned the Newfoundland Railroad for this highway, which is only drivable if you have Trailer Guy. Around this time, there's a bunch of similar abandonments. So Prince Edward Island had a railroad which was very hastily abandoned by Canadian National when they heard that the Confederation Bridge might have a railroad on it, and then they'd be on the hook for running it.
Jesus. It's Canadian National, the fucking your dad who goes out for cigarettes and never comes back. Just incredible.
Yes. The bridge is nice. I can say that. I've driven across that bridge.
I've never been over the bridge.
Okay, we'll go across the bridge. We make our triumphant return.
You just get arrested at the border for like 900 charges of speeding.
They don't know who we are or what we look like.
Yeah, you are Newfoundland's #1 most wanted. There is no other crime. There's one cop on Newfoundland, but he's just like staring at a picture of Liam constantly for like 7 hours every day to burn that face into his memory.
The GTI just goes screaming past.
We'll catch that guy going however fast in fucking Fortune Bay or wherever.
Yeah.
Yeah, very quickly, because again, look, if we had hit anything, we would have already been dead, and no medic is going to come for us. So you wanted to make the boat, we made the boat. I don't know what the issue is.
Oh, they're supposedly installing traffic cameras here now on the highways.
Fascists.
Jesus.
Bastards, I know.
I know, right? So, and then Vancouver Island on the other side of Canada, their railroad was effectively abandoned about 5 years ago. And Via Rail is constantly cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting, which is bizarre because a lot of Canada is pretty well served by trains if they just let them.
I mean, it seems like Canada's quite like big. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that. And like it seems in some ways more efficient to have a dedicated route where you can pull something with a locomotive than having a bunch of different trucks, one of which has a trailer, thankfully, just like slamming into each other forever.
Well, there's like a weird... trucks are regulated in Canada different than they are in the United States, which actually makes trucking a bit more practical because I think it's based on per axle load is how big your trailer can be versus... here in the United States, an 80,000 pound limit flat. In Canada, you can just stick more axles on the trucks and, have as much weight as you want.
More axles is more better.
Just kind of gravitating towards the Australian style road train. Fantastic.
Oh, those are super tight.
Also, popping back to Atlantic Canada with the abandonments. So Nova Scotia still has some rail connection. There's the main line into Halifax, but at the same time this was going on, the loop line that ran around the Annapolis Valley through the South Shore and back towards Halifax, that was taken up, and that's a fairly, it's not like it's the most populated place in the world, but it's still quite a few thousand people living down there. Even the line going to Sydney, there used to be a passenger train that linked up with Via Rail's ocean service. That's gone now. In fact, I don't even think they're running freight trains up there anymore.
Jeez. I mean, you mentioned Halifax. That's a preview of an episode to come on a more, let's say,
explosive topic?
Yes. Yeah.
We're both reaching for the same pun there.
But I mean, even when I mentioned at the start of the episode, like you could have taken a train from Boston to Halifax, and then you could have taken a train from Halifax to North Sydney.
Yeah.
Like it would have been one transfer.
Yep.
That was the goal that was run by Boston and Maine and a bunch of other railroads, because it wasn't really a train so much as it was a bunch of through cars they stuck together from various other trains. So you imagine you're leaving North Station with a train of 16 cars, none of which are owned by the same railroad.
None of them match.
This is the future liberals want.
They're all different colors and shit.
And now, of course, we can't conceive of that, right? I mean, if I tried to get as far as Halifax by train from Philadelphia, that's...
Up to Montreal you go, yeah.
Yeah, I got to stay over a night in Montreal
Yeah.
unless I get lucky with the Adirondack.
Does anyone ever get lucky on the Adirondack?
I did
Oh.
get into Montreal early enough that I could have switched to the ocean right there.
Oh, I was just being disgusting.
Oh.
That's because the train showed up 2 hours early. There's a lot of padding in that schedule. But I guess the question I wanted to pose here is like, is this inevitable, right? Is it always going to be the case that, like, these small island railroads are impossible to run, especially where it's sparsely populated, right?
Well, that doesn't seem like a Canadian locomotive or Canadian buildings there. So I get the sense that this is your counterexample.
Yes. So this is the Sakhalin Railway. Sakhalin? I don't know.
Sakhalin.
I think it's Sakhalin.
Sakhalin.
I think
Sakhalin.
So this is in this is in Russia. It's that big island north of Japan, right?
Yeah.
the
Shot down a
island is-
Korean Airlines plane over at one time. Just
Well, you gotta.
you gotta not enter Soviet airspace unwittingly is the thing.
I think that was over Kamchatka, wasn't it? This is the 007 flight, right?
Yeah, I definitely remember Sakhalin in the context of the Soviet Air Force shooting down
It's
a
close.
lost airliner. So
Well, they're trying to prove the superiority of the railroad.
yeah,
Well, it's still there.
This is the thing. Yeah, if you fly over if you fly over Sakhalin illegally, you might see the railroad and then decide that railroads on like small outlying islands are a good idea, and that would be counter to all of the principles of socialism in one country. It might foment revolution somewhere else, and obviously you can't have that.
But so this railroad was run under Soviet administration for a very long time. It's the island has a similar population to Newfoundland. It's I think about the same size, very different shape though.
Yeah.
The terrain is similar, and it's a narrow gauge railroad, and it still runs to this day. Although they just fully converted it to Russian gauge a few months ago, I think they finished up the job.
They
Neat.
pushed the rails apart.
With sticks.
Yeah, they managed to push the rails apart. And it's still a essential transportation system on the island. I mean, their highways are absolute garbage. I mean,
Yeah.
much worse than the Trans-Canada.
Never ever drive in Russia. The thing when the Soviet Union fell was you had all of these new Russians buying BMWs and Mercedes, and there was one road in Moscow and Arbatskaya that you could drive them on. Everywhere else would just destroy your expensive German suspension. And it's still like that. Incredible. Yeah.
Don't drive in Russia. But yeah, it was maintained and it expanded in the Soviet Union. Stalin tried to build a tunnel to Sakhalin, and they got as far as sinking shafts.
Nice.
They got as far as sinking shafts for the TBMs in the 1950s, and then Stalin died, and everyone realized this was a dumb project.
Kind of realized that you didn't actually need all of these like artists and poets and stuff who like to dig a giant fucking tunnel to the middle of nowhere.
But Putin is making noises about trying it again, though.
Oh, he's always.
Oh, boy.
Look, our boy is our big, wet, dumb president of Russia is constantly making noises about big infrastructure projects, and it never happens. If this ever like gets to more than like a paper stage, it will be as a way of shoveling 50 million rubles to some guy who's cousins with some other guy.
They're gonna build a tunnel from Sakhalin to Hokkaido in Japan. That's gonna happen. That's happening.
Well, I mean, the tunnel between the mainland. I mean, I don't think it was a huge distance, was it?
It was like 5 miles, I think.
Yeah. And in fact, there's talk here about. Well, I mean, off and on. Even the Sullivan Commission report talks about this: building a tunnel between Newfoundland and Labrador. And they're finally. The provincial government seems to be taking that seriously now. And even in the federal election, some of the candidates were openly talking about it.
It's the same huge transfer of wealth, but it's between two guys named Irving.
And they're going to build it, and it's going to be shit. I mean, in order for it to work nicely, well, ideally, we'd have a Quebec North Shore Labrador Railway network that would link to the island, but at the very least, they're just going to put a shitty road along the Quebec North Shore to service the communities there. And I don't know, there's people talking about doing something along the lines of the channel, so you got like a train that loads up the cars and then goes, as opposed to doing like a Norway or Denmark model where you just have, regular tunnels you can drive through. So I don't know how far that's actually going to go. I think there is a lot of potential there. I mean, especially for the northern peninsula, but I can't see the powers that be doing anything good with it.
I mean, this is the thing, right? If you do a channel tunnel sort of mechanism, it will at least be morally better than the actual channel tunnel in that it will kill fewer immigrants.
Well, yeah.
Unless you put a border, unless you secede from Canada and put a border in the middle of it, then I think it will be an improvement.
The chauvinists here will want to keep Labrador. We like sucking the mineral resources out of it.
Hell yeah.
Suck it, Quebecois.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to in some cases.
Yeah, but, I mean, I guess the thing I guess to conclude on is is there a future where we have a railroad in Newfoundland? And
yes, please.
Personally, I think yes, please. We've got this whole climate change doohickey that's happening, right? It's
the thing that's asking the question: is there a future with a Newfoundland, rather than is there a future with a Newfoundland railway?
Well, I mean, I think Newfoundland comes out on top in climate change a lot more than a lot of other places, but
just get a much higher fjord, I suppose.
The cliffs are so high here. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Well, planning a move. Got to revise my French.
So, but it's the efficiency of transport you get with railroads, you can't beat any other way. I mean, if every 4,000 horsepower locomotive is doing the work of, 100 or 200, 500 horsepower trucks, I think if we're serious about this and we're not gonna go with the urban liberal stance, which is everyone in Newfoundland should move to Montreal.
Yeah.
And learn to code.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
You gotta put it back.
Look, I mean, I think there is something genuinely important to this about, having a solution to climate change that does include, let's say, less populated areas and, rural areas and, let's say, traditionally underserved populations.
For sure.
That if we're gonna do this thing where we fix society, we do have to bring everybody along with us, and you're not gonna do that by making everybody learn Ruby on Rails. You just have to do the Rails part.
Yeah, you just do the Rails part, and it turns out this is remarkably practical, right? I almost forgot to include this in the presentation because I constantly erase the First Nations.
Yes.
There you go, asshole.
Yes. So this is the train you're looking at here is the other railroad in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Oh, hell yeah.
This one is, of course, in Labrador. This is Deschutes Rail Transportation.
Jeez.
I don't know if
I think it's Schweten.
Schweten?
But I have no conception of how to properly pronounce it. I think
extremely
it's
cool livery though.
The trains look good.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, and the logo is
It's
really
a
nice.
sexy train.
Yes. So this is part of the former Quebec North Shore and Labrador Railway. which ran from Sept-Îles, Quebec, to Labrador City.
Jesus. How do you fuck up French that badly? 7 islands. Sept îles.
Doesn't matter in Quebec. I actually want to point out that
I don't know how to pronounce anything.
well, the first time we went to Quebec, we stopped at a Tim Hortons, of course, the only thing.
God.
And, yeah, I'm gonna tell this story. And
It's all going in the fanfiction, man.
Do Not Eat went in there and he tried to order a large black coffee, and managed to say, cafe large noir, please.
I mean, that is basically how most Anglo-Canadians speak French, right? Like,
It was just tried to order a coffee in 2 languages and successfully
it's like,
spoke neither of
you're
those
from
languages.
Ontario. Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot how to speak both English and French. The first
Look,
time I was in Quebec.
I'm just happy to distract from the Newfoundlanders thing.
Well, you did your best.
Newfoundlanders.
Chisuin, the thing.
Go on.
They
North
took
wind
over,
in English.
Yeah, they took over a 134 mile branch line to Shefferville, Quebec, which the railroad was trying to abandon. So the First Nations came and said, "Look, we need this railroad. We're going to run it." And
Jesus, how sad that they only considered that option when it was like, yeah, we're just gonna let it rot.
yeah,
Yeah.
And the people who actually live here and who live there first have to be like, yeah, maybe we should do the thing instead of you doing that.
Oh, I had never considered that.
yeah. Maybe instead of abandoning it, you should let us run it so we can have a train.
Yeah.
And so they provide, essential passenger and freight service to very isolated communities in northern Quebec. And this is, oh boy, I got to get through 3 First Nations here.
Oh boy.
This is jointly owned by the Innu Nation of Matamikush Lac John, the Naskapaki Nation of, oh boy,
Kamash, yeah.
Kawawachibikamash, and the Innu Takuakian Ushat Mani Uchen. I'm sorry.
Almost.
Justin, you sound
You were
like
so close,
me
Justin.
praying when I first became Muslim and I didn't know any Arabic. That's what I sounded like.
Yeah, all 3 of those First Nations, their communities are all around the Shefferville area. It's like Justin said, extremely isolated. Not a single road other than the railway. Labrador is still, pretty much a isolated place in general. So this railway serves a huge and vital service to them.
Mutual aid. It's the trailer guy scaled up
Yeah.
to a trailer
a whole
railroad.
train.
To train guy.
This
This is why we did the acknowledgement of the stolen lands we were on at the beginning, to do penance for my horrific mispronunciations later on.
Yeah, it was gonna tie it all together. We do actually plan this stuff ahead of time.
That's us. That's what we do, is plan good.
So, I mean, it turns out like you can just have a railroad if you want to.
Imagine that.
Yeah. You
Aw.
personally, your community can have a railroad.
Yes.
I mean, not to. I mean, I'm still the big bad, big state Marxist-Leninist, but it turns out that you can autonomously organize these things. You can, have this framework of a sovereign nation that is like, yeah, let's just have a fucking railroad that doesn't that goes to our town, so we don't all die from not having medicine. You can do that. You can organize that. You can organize anything. A better world is possible.
Yes.
She said overconfidently.
I say it's still possible to come to this province and travel as a passenger on train. Although, one of the odd things, once it reaches Emerald Junction, which is near Lab City, the train doesn't actually go into Lab City, which is kind of odd, because that's the main population center in Labrador West. But anyway, it stops. This is 50 kilometers to the east of Labrador City, so unless you have someone waiting there It's basically a stop in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, it does, like it said, terminate in Sept-Îles, which is 20,000 people, something like that, and that connects to basically everything else in Quebec, right? So it's very handy. Shockingly, okay, so there was this concept that was floating around. I don't know how seriously the federal government ever took it, of developing northern railways in Canada. Like, for example, extending the line from Churchill up along the west coast of Hudson Bay into Nunavut, and also having lines going to northern Ontario, northern Quebec, and also having a line cutting across Labrador ending in Goose Bay. Purpose of this being, ending or reducing isolation in the north and having greater flow of goods, especially in the Arctic, where getting anything is incredibly costly. So this was part of a concept to have more railroads and greater ports to service the Canadian North, but nothing's materialized of that in any significant sense.
Well, it sounds like the kind of thing that you'd need a concerted, large program of government intervention, some kind of like New Deal of a green nature, perhaps.
A bit of socialism in there.
Yeah, a little bit of socialism.
Impossible. Too bad that's impossible. Nope.
Yeah.
I will say, the green aspect is starting to catch on with quite a few people here in this province. Lots of people have been drawn out to the climate strikes that have been going on every few weeks, and some of the federal candidates with the local Social Democrats also said friendly things about bringing a railway back to Newfoundland, and none of those got elected here. I mean, of course, our party, the Communist Party, talks about it all the time because, we love trains. Every communist has to love trains. It's like written in the rule book or something.
I have heard that, yeah.
Page 2 of the manifesto. Yeah.
But yeah, so just the fact that the NDP, like the New Democrats, that a couple of them were talking about a railway here in Newfoundland again, that's really neat. I mean, for years I thought I was just the lone crank who liked trains, but yeah, there's actually still a few people here that are into that, so I don't know, we can build something.
Yeah, the three cranks, the lone gunman. The strange thing about this is, like, it's weird to look at a train like that, this enormous fucking diesel engine, and much like the nuclear power episode, which we previously recorded, and say this is actually the environmentally friendly option, but it is. It really is. It's difficult to process the kind of scale that we're talking about here, and nobody's gonna do a photo of this where we put it next to, I don't know, 500 trucks, right? But that's basically the deal, right? And you're comparing all of that exhaust and all of those fumes and everything. It's if not a totally green option, it's kind of, things like this are the only way we can restructure our society in time to make a real important difference to not all dying.
Also, you can put wires up.
Yes, saying here, the provincial government's attitude towards green is hydroelectric dams. And those are problematic, and so
they're okay. I mean, you get a fish tube out of it, and everyone has a fun time on Twitter that afternoon making fish tube memes.
Well, the big thing up here now is a major hydroelectric project, of course, in Labrador. It's at a place called Muskrat Falls, and obviously the First Nations in the area are pissed off about it because it's flooding their land naturally. Some of them are, people there are partially supportive because it's jobs, if nothing else. But by and large, people are opposed to the project, because it's an attack on their sovereignty. In addition to the environmental impact of flooding all that land and potential collapses that could kill people and destroy infrastructure and so on. And the other thing that's got people pissed off about it is the cost. I mean, I know we're here talking about building a new railway in Newfoundland. I mean, that wouldn't be cheap, of course. You'd be looking at $6 or $7 billion for sure if you're building it right. That's just a rough estimate off the top of my head. The government is putting $13 billion into this dam, and there's a good part of that is a loan guarantee from the federal government. But even so, it's okay for them to put, in their view, it's okay for them to throw that kind of money at a project that's of questionable utility, but something that would be actually useful to a great number of people and also very green in its own way is kind of just laughed aside. It's like, well, geez, we all got trucks.
But it's not. It's not sexy, and it doesn't have good. I mean, me calling it a sexy train aside. It doesn't make good content, it doesn't make good photos. You can't have Justin Trudeau pose in front of it like you can a dam.
Sure, you can.
Look, we're not meeting any of our climate targets under the Paris Agreement, but we built this dam, so we must be taking it seriously, and I must be an environmentalist.
And meanwhile, they want to double down on oil production in 10 years.
Of course.
You know,
You also got to keep Justin Trudeau away from the shoe polish.
Yeah.
Got to get that dig in there somewhere.
Yeah, you just got to keep him away from the crude oil, because like it's too viscous, but he'll try it anyway.
I need it, as he sticks his face into a barrel of Alberta crude.
Yeah,
Just
like that one scene in
"Accept
Three
me,
Kings.
Accept me now.
so before we conclude, I guess we're getting to that point. I just wanted to add, with the current state of transportation here, which, surprise, surprise, is fucking awful. So yeah, with regards to the highway, we know that shit. But there is a bus system here. So that CN bus system that was brought in to replace the passenger trains when that was abandoned in '69, they kept on going until CN was privatized in '96.
Nice.
And it was taken over by a private firm then, and they've done fucking nothing with it.
Fantastic.
So the Sullivan Commission report was like, Newfoundland should have this huge, province-wide, comprehensive, integrated bus system. Like, get a ticket in St. John's, it'll get you to St. Anthony or Goose Bay, Port aux Basques, wherever. And have multiple buses running from the same location each at multiple times during the day, so that you don't just have to get the 8 a.m. bus, you can get a bus at 10 or 2 o'clock or whatever. Well, there were a few slight improvements, but obviously since privatization, it's just the main highway. And you get that bus at 8 in the morning or not at all.
Oh boy.
And it takes, like I said, 14 hours, assuming the weather's good, between St. John's and Port aux Basques. And if you want to go anywhere off the main highway, there's a handful of like privately owned shuttle bus / taxi companies. Some of them are fairly cheap, I guess, but their schedules aren't linked with the main highway bus.
Of course not. That would be too easy.
And again, they run on very limited schedules anyway. So I mean, you might get into Corner Brook and have to wait a day or two to get the bus to where you're going, and it might not go as far as you want to go anyway. And all for the privilege of sitting in a cramped van for 7 or 8 hours.
Hey,
right?
Vans.
Of course.
Yeah. I will say that the main highway coaches they're okay, they're comfortable enough, but it's no substitute for a proper train.
So, car bad, train good, bus intermediate.
Oh, and the buses are expensive. Imagine that.
Bus bad.
Yeah, it's a one-way trip from Corner Brook to St. John's is about $110.
Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Yeah. So you know it's bad when it's cheaper to just drive and pay your own gas.
Well, it seems like that's a massive engineering disaster right there, along with, of course, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse. This is a major engineering disaster we'll be covering
next
in the next episode. Yes.
Finally.
Episodes question mark +1.
I don't know what episode this is, so I can't tell you what the
I am confident Tacoma Narrows is
9,
coming
I
up soon.
Yes. We're also going to get some bumper stickers and some badges too that someone has made for us of, well, there's your problem, and also train good, car bad.
Are we
and
getting
I did
those?
say, yeah, I think so. But we'll put the link in the thing. And I did say on the Twitter that we would give a shout out on the next episode to the first person to send us a photo of the train good, car bad sticker stuck to a train. Don't break any laws, don't die, but yeah, do that.
And I guess since we're wrapping up, go to our Patreon, where by the time this is up, the Grover House episode should be up. Right now, I'm about 30 minutes into editing it.
Good job.
It is a good episode. I do regret there was an obvious joke we should have made, which we missed. Which was something
that's
about,
not like us at all.
Who would do that?
Right? Which is something about like Notre Dame de Grover or something like that.
Well, the problem with
reference
Grover
to
House
the-
is that spire. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, all right. Before we go, the plugs. Let's go.
Listen to Trash Future, my podcast. It's available wherever podcasts are podcasted.
Watch my YouTube channel. Do Not Eat. About cities and socialism. I promise there'd be another Franklin episode at some point.
It's been a while.
I was wondering about all the people in the comments.
Yeah,
that are
the
yelling at
comments
you.
are getting heated, and it's just like he'll get there, but folks, he'll get there.
When it's done.
Our boy needs time to work his magic.
Yeah, I mean, apart from everything else, City Skylines takes like an hour to launch.
Yeah, especially
Yes.
when you load it down with mods.
It's
like
an
an
awkward
asshole.
I feel like the launch time has extended in the last few months. I don't know what it is.
Definitely. It may be one of the 11,000 mods that I have installed, but also I refuse to play it without any of them. So
Yeah.
Mod
yeah,
until it breaks.
Yeah.
You want to go? You want me to go? All right. I guess I'll go. All right.
yeah.
Wreck 'em. Liam Anderson
Jesus.
at shut the fuck up at Old Man Anderson on Twitter. Just want to say special thanks to my boy Trailer Guy for blocking for us for approximately 250 miles. We couldn't have done it without you. I love you so much.
yeah, let's do some Trailer Guy shirts or something.
Yes, please.
And Sean, do you have anything to plug before we go?
Not especially. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's SeanRad. Like I said, I mostly just retweet communist stuff. Sometimes I say things that are witty. Oftentimes not. But yeah. Thanks for having me on the show, though.
All right. Yeah,
Oh,
thank
our
you for
pleasure.
blessing us with your expertise and wisdom about Newfoundland.
Anytime.
Hey.
And
Yeah, sorry for calling you
that's
Newfies.
all right.
And also Newfoundland.
If you do get back here,
Yeah.
look me up. I'd love to have a coffee or something, or a beer.
Sure, sounds
That's
good.
good.
We spent a total of like 3 minutes in Corner Brook at a McDonald's.
And the train
Full of
museum.
people who just-
You liked the train
Oh,
museum.
yeah, we
you
did go to the
lying
train
fuck.
museum.
The
Yeah.
only good train
Yeah,
museum.
Yeah, we
That
did go to
is-
the train museum.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is our first live show. Is going to be the train museum in Corner Brook.
Actually, I should say
Good
the
museum.
one in
They
Port
were
of
very
Bass is
nice
pretty
to
good
us
too.
there. The steam locomotive there was interesting. That was the first picture in the slideshow because it was made in Philadelphia. It was like, oh,
Good old
the
Baldwin
link's
locomotive.
same
running
trip we
through
did.
every fucking episode.
Yay.
It's very clever of you.
Thank you.
yes.
I'll take credit for it.
All right.
Yeah, I was going to say, why did you say
I don't know,
thank you?
I was
What a
ready.
fucking idea. Jesus.
All right. I'm gonna end it. We're an hour and 30
God
minutes. in.
damn it.
Good podcast,
All right,
everyone.
thank you for having
Yeah.
me on again.
Podcast.
Have a
All
good evening,
right.
folks.
All right,
Bye.
now we just have to record all of this again in French.
I don't
Oh, merde.
Bonjour. You lost. Speak English.
Voici votre problème.
All right.
right.
Au
I'm
revoir.
stopping.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Bonne chance.
Merci.
Oh, oui.